This book, The Walls Around Opportunity, The Failure of Colorblind Policy in Higher Education, is a message to higher education and to public schools that we're on the wrong path, that it's not working, that it's neglected the basic reality of our society, which is racial difference, racial exclusion. The colleges are a precious resource in terms of offering opportunity to people of color and offering opportunity for everybody to be trained to be leaders in our major institutions across racial and ethnic lines. We can't do this without explicitly thinking and acting on racial inequality. That if we try to do it in some indirect way, it won't work, because the root of the problem is in the racial inequality that hits people of color from even before they're born.
If you look back at the policy of the 1960s and when Johnson declared his war on poverty, the cost of public education was mostly met by the Pell Grant. But in the late 70s and early 80s, increasingly states began to pull back their support for public higher education. Many states, we ended up spending more money per capita on incarceration than on education. And you kept thinking, okay, how did our priorities shift?
Look at higher education and say, are we doing the expansive talent search? Are we looking at the assets of students, or only thinking of their deficits and how we could maybe help them? Let's not help them, let's actually empower them and bring them to the table. In reversing the really deleterious effects of these decades of colorblind policies, we have to think about what race-sensitive and race-conscious policies look like. How will they really function on the ground in educational settings? But we have to do that not in a vacuum. We have to do that taking into account the lives and neighborhoods and histories that students actually come from.
The history of discrimination goes between generations. If your parents were denied an education, they don't have the resources to send you to college. They don't have the resources to get into a neighborhood with good schools. They don't have the knowledge of how you connect with college that people whose parents have been to college have. That's a direct intergenerational effect. It passes from one generation to the next, especially within the context of residential and educational segregation.
In addition to our retreat from a conversation about diversity, there's really a broader retreat from an encounter with history. We want to walk away from the past because it may make us uncomfortable. But if you can't talk about the history of the United States in K through 12, and you realize only a fraction of Americans actually go on to higher education, when will all the citizens of our country understand our past? Because failing to understand it means then we can't account for the present, let alone begin to design a future. And so if you start with the premise, as we have in this series, that talent is equally distributed across the world, access to opportunity is not. We come back to then the importance of defining, leveraging, and valuing diversity for a prosperous democracy.
What more important lever for that valuing diversity and leveraging diversity is there than education? Without educational opportunity, the systems that have excluded will win out. And the only way we're going to get educational opportunity is to take down the walls around opportunity.
What's happened as the country's changed racially, our civil rights policies have retreated and been reversed and attacked and assailed, and they're now under tremendous threat in the United States Supreme Court, which is the most conservative Supreme Court we've had in more than 90 years.
And as Gary's book really pinpoints, the segregation in our schools by race and class is really undermining the ability of everybody to live together in a multiracial democracy.
And what we're trying to end up really suggesting to a broader set of publics is that this is a we, not just an I, framing of the question of diversity.